Rapid planning. 15 minutes. Yeah. It's really hard when you're presenting. You just lose track. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to everybody who's here joining us in person and everyone who's online from around the world. I'm delighted to host today's version or today's installment of the East West Center Research Series, Research Speaker Series. Sorry, it's my first time hosting this event. My name is Jean Lee, and I'm the Presidential Chair here at the East West Center. I'm filling in for our Senior Fellow, Denny Roy. And before I introduce our speaker, let me just tell you a little bit about the speaker series today. This East West Center Research Speaker Series gives us the opportunity to feature scholars who are doing really groundbreaking research and analysis on developments and trends that are reshaping the Asia-Pacific region today in truly profound and provocative ways. So now let me just introduce you. It's my pleasure to introduce you today to Marialaura de Angelis. She is currently a James A. Kelly Fellow at Pacific Forum here in Honolulu. And she did serve as a POSCO Fellow here at the East West Center last year. So we all got a chance to get to know her. And we will still claim her. And we're glad that she's back for this presentation. Now, just a little bit about her. She's been focusing on the Korean Peninsula since 2008. For many years, that was from Europe and now from the vantage point of Honolulu. In 2011, she helped develop a Track 1.5 dialogue. As many of you know, Track 1.5 talks involve dialogue among both official government representatives as well as non-governmental representatives. And those talks were aimed at adapting lessons from the Irish peace process to the divided Korean Peninsula. In 2014, she co-founded Track 2 Asia. That's a Brussels-based NGO specializing in Track 2, so non-governmental talks, as well as Track 1.5 diplomacy between Europe and East Asia. And in 2017, she joined the Korea Negotiation Initiative, and this is a research project that looks at ways to facilitate a negotiated resolution to the North Korean nuclear crisis. And during her time here at the East West Center, Marialaura explored the role of cultural frameworks and strategic narratives in negotiations and how these might, come on in, sit down, take a seat, how these might open new pathways for US engagement with North Korea. So her talk today, as you see, is Rethinking Denuclearization, Breaking the Narrative Deadlock in US-North Korea Talks. And I think we can welcome you to the podium now. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I am just going to, just a few housekeeping notes. We'll have about 30 minutes for her presentation and we'll move into a Q&A. So certainly start thinking of questions. And I will give her a heads up. Hopefully we'll have enough time for some questions. So start queuing them up. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. It's an honor to be introduced by the great Jean Lee. Hi, everyone, and thank you for coming to my presentation. So as Jean introduced, this is a research that I started as that I started as continuation of my mediation work during the first Trump administration engagement with North Korea, where I actually realized that innovative diplomacy was constrained by an established framework based on assumptions that hadn't been put in question for a very long time. Therefore, analysis, especially of the deadlock around denuclearization, tended to focus on tactical issues such as sequencing, overreach, the lack of political will or lack of trust. But I thought that the problem might be in the framework itself. Therefore, why I did think so, let's say that in most conflicts, parts assume that they know exactly what a conflict is about, and they assume that they agree on what the conflict is about. But the reality is that most of the time, parties do not agree on what the conflict is about, when and how it started, who is involved, and how to solve it. And that's because each side interprets the conflict through its own particular strategic narrative that is shaped by their historical and cultural overview. Like this is better. Okay. So what is a strategic narrative? Is a story that a state tells about itself that links its past, present, and future to give itself an identity, identify its goals, and it legitimizes its policy and align both domestic and international support behind its goals and its policies. So in negotiations, this narrative becomes the framework for the diplomatic space. They are what defines what are the interests, what are the deadlines, the red lines, and their negotiation style. Oops. Okay. When two sides come to the table with clashing narratives, what happens? It looks, negotiations start to look like a game where players play according to different rule books without even knowing it. Therefore, each side assumes that their rule book is the right one, and they perceive the other as breaking the rules of the game and negotiating in bad faith. This is the case of US DPRK negotiations. If we look at it, it's not just a problem of sequencing. They have always defined these negotiations differently. One side, the US has always said that they were having nuclear negotiation with North Korea, while the DPRK always talked about peace talks. Therefore, they were having two different negotiations at the same table. And this disconnect has shaped, in my analysis, decades of failed diplomacy. So what do we need to do in order to unpack the whole framework? We have to look at these strategic narratives, see how they impact the negotiations, and then see whether a reframing of these narratives can actually enable a different structure for the negotiations. Let's look at North Korea first. So North Korea's worldview that shapes the strategic narratives are in particular two. The first is the guerrilla states narrative that is rooted in the collective trauma of the Japanese colonial occupation. We can say North Korea's never again, which actually made independence and sovereignty the main drivers of its foreign policy, and it justifies nuclear weapons as existential guarantees. This is linked to the fact that then the whole institutional structure of the North Korean state has been modeled on the historical experience of Kim Il-sung's anti-colonial resistance. And why is this important? Because this actually shapes their attitude towards their relationship with the US. Because American imperialism, as they call it, is seen as the continuation of Japanese colonialism, and their struggle, their fights to keep their independence from US is framed as a continuation and as a mission that Kim Jong-un has inherited from his grandfather. And this links, of course, to the fact that they have a siege mentality. They think that the Korean War never ended. So they are perpetually at war, which justifies, again, the militarization of the state, nuclear weapons, and the fact that they say that they cannot denuclearize if they don't have a peace treaty ending the Korean War. Another side of their post-colonial identity is what we could call Korean ethnic exceptionalism. So the fact that they refuse to think about Korea as a small state or as a rogue state, They view it as a great nation that is destined for great things under the guidance of the Kim family, of course. And in this narrative, the nuclear program is not just a security guarantee, but it becomes the badge of equality that lets them sit at the same table with the most powerful country in the world as equals. And this is why they often say that if they talk about denuclearization, it will be their own strategic and sovereign choice as a great nation, as not as surrendering to pressure by a more powerful state. This doesn't sit well with Washington's view on this negotiation, because if North Korea roots its approach back, all the way back to the Korean War, for the US, the first time they sat on the table with the North Koreans was in the early 1990s, during the first nuclear crisis. Therefore, the imprinting in their approach is actually on defending the non-proliferation multilateral framework, and is rooted in the moral and institutional worldview of the post-World War II liberal international order, and in particular of the US role in it. Because the US is the benevolent hegemon, it's the one that created this order and that leads the free world. It's the indispensable nation, is the one that protects this order, that saved the world from Hitler and keeps saving the world from the forces of evil. So in a way, US's nuclear arsenal is what the world, the whole world needs to be protected. And it's a force of good. However, in this order, North Korea sits at the very opposite side. Because in the US worldview, we have what we call the Manichaean framing that divides the world in forces of good and evil, democracy and tyranny, friends or enemies, with no middle ground. And North Korea has always sat at the wrong side of this divide. They have always been the enemy, or even less, because they sit outside of the rules-based order. They're not like China and Russia, strategic adversaries. They are an outlier, a rogue actor. Therefore, their security concerns are also looked at as irrational or illegitimate. Their nuclear program is portrayed as a challenge to the rules-based order. And now it has evolved to a direct security threat to both the US and its allies. So let's see practically how this impacts the way they frame negotiations. For North Korea, it's all about the relationship with the US. Why? When we look at North Korea's strategic narrative, we can see how its nuclear program and its relationship with the US are not merely interconnected, they are two sides of the same coins. In the guerrilla states narrative, where the US is the adversary, they serve as a security guarantee. In the Korean exceptionalism, they serve as a badge of equality to reach their ambition to be recognized as equal by the US. Therefore, for them, the relationship is actually the subject of this negotiation, because the relationship is the problem, the hostile relationship with the US. In this frame, even if they denuclearize, as long as this hostile relationship stays, nothing will change. The US will go after them over human rights, democratization, and other things. So they say that there is no incentive to disarm. Actually, the opposite, because they don't trust commitments by the US to be so sustained in the long term, especially because of the 4-year democratic cycle. And in fact, for them, then the change of relationship would be the perfect and the only security guarantee. Becoming friends with the US, passing on the other side of the Manichaean divide. And not only the relationship would be not only the solution to their security issue, would also be the solution to the problem of the US, because they believe that if the relationship transforms, the US will not see their nuclear program as a problem anymore, and will probably not even ask them to denuclearize anymore, or not completely. However, on the other side, we can see that the United States strategic narrative is structuring talks around completely different issues. So although Pyongyang has evolved from a non-proliferation concern to a direct security concern, the original framework that was based on the post-World War II liberal internationalism and on the NPT still influences their approach. This causes, on one side, a politicization of the issue that undermines US national security, and on the other side, an outdated non-proliferation approach that at times hinders denuclearization efforts themselves. So the politicization of the North Korean threat undermines UN security. How? This has been studied in depth by Siegfried Hecker, who has identified all the time in history where US administrations took decisions on their North Korean policy because of internal politics and not based on pragmatic costs benefits calculations, and how this actually over time allowed for the threats of the nuclear program of North Korea to grow bigger, and so a bigger threat to US security. This politicization also complicates engagement with North Korea, because North Korea is a political liability. It takes a lot of political capital to actually engage with it, especially to sustain engagement over time in spite of all the provocations. Therefore, I was suggesting in the past to reframe the approach in terms of national security. In the non-proliferation trap, as I call it, actually brings another issue, the fact that recognizing the DPRK as a nuclear state is seen as rewarding bad behavior, which would undermine the NPT and potentially encouraging others to follow suit. And also, and this in turn brings an approach where the diplomacy can only happen if North Korea at least commits to denuclearization upfront. Without that commitment, there cannot be the diplomacy. This has also created over time a sort of over-reliance on sanctions that are still now, in spite of the fact that the DPRK is now a de facto nuclear state and a security threat, sanctions remain in the US strategy as the main leverage, the main bargaining chip to get rid of their nuclear program. How do this narrative actually clash? I mean, we can see that each side wants to have talks within their own framework, but if Pyongyang accepts to negotiate within the US framework, then they have to admit that they are an illegitimate regime. They don't have a right to a nuclear program. They are inferior to the US. And that would actually undermine the legitimization and therefore the safety of the regime domestically and abroad. But if Washington accepts to negotiate in Pyongyang's terms, it would erode its credibility as a leader international, the credibility of its deterrence, and any administration who would actually negotiate in this way would pay a hefty political price at home. Therefore, a deal requires to reframe the conflicts before it can negotiate the terms. Let's see how Donald Trump coming to the White House changed things. It changed everything because the US approach that we just described has been completely reversed. He breaks this established framework. He refuses the role of the US as in the indispensable nation or the benevolent hegemon. And he operates in a reverse moral structure, what we can call inverse Manichaeism, that reevaluate alliances with traditional allies, and it's open to that dialogue with traditional enemies, such as North Korea. This, of course, creates opportunities because breaking the established framework creates the flexibility for innovative and creative approaches. It opens the space for bilateral diplomacy, in particular because he can have an approach that is free from any prejudgment on a moral ground on the North Korean regime. So he can negotiate with Kim as equal, and he opens the political space to recognize North Korea as a nuclear power. Actually, he already hinted at doing so at the beginning of his second term. However, his signature transactional business style diplomacy also opens to risks. First of all, without really understanding Kim's underlying goals and objectives, he risks giving him the upper hand or just having negotiations on the basis of miscalculations. But most importantly, he cannot repeat the mistake that in my analysis they did in Hanoi, thinking that their personal rapport alone could actually override the fundamental differences between their countries' goals and strategic narratives. If he just rejects all the old frameworks without actually building support for a new one within the institutional, political and bureaucratic elites in Washington, any deal made under his administration will probably be rolled back during the next administration. And also, he will need to engage with regional allies, international institutions, and the wider international community, because a deal with North Korea will need the support of South Korea, Japan, the EU, the UN, because they have to pay for it. So he will need to align support. So what can Trump do to reset the terms of engagement and open a new path for diplomacy without alienating domestic or allied support? As I mentioned, dismantling old framework will not be enough. He has to create new ones. And in particular, both him and Kim have to move from clashing narrative to narratives that can actually coexist, because they need to eventually negotiate within the same framework. And it needs to be a framework and narratives in support of it that can align domestic and international support, be behind a deal to make it sustainable. So let's see what are my suggestions for possible ideas of new narratives. First of all, moving away from rewarding bad behavior. North Korea is now a de facto nuclear state. So it's not anymore comparable to Iran or Libya, but more to India or Pakistan. So in the non-proliferation frame, we were saying, if the DPRK doesn't denuclearize, it sets a bad precedent. However, now that it is a de facto nuclear state, this is completely different, because in history, there has never been a case of a state that has been convinced to give up a functioning nuclear deterrent. This would be the first time. Therefore, Trump can actually frame it as it is, an historic breakthrough. He will be attempting something that has not been attempted before, which will give him a lot more flexibility in diplomacy at home and abroad. This has to be coupled with a shift to a national security approach. So if the focus has to go, at least the priority focus has to be on reducing the threat of the nuclear weapons rather than on denuclearization per se, which would help depoliticize the issue and develop a more pragmatic approach based on cost-benefits calculations. This shift in narratives will actually open the way for an incremental approach to move away from the idea of a big bargain, of a big deal, even with a long implementation agreement, in favor of smaller standalone agreements, which will also be easier to implement. And also to move away from demands for full commitment on the denuclearization upfront, and instead move to a phased incremental approach that will prioritize the threats reduction to then move on towards denuclearization. Therefore, it doesn't have to be now or never, which is an approach that so far has only brought the further development of North Korea's nuclear program. It can be now and then. We can start from arms control and then move on to denuclearization and eventually disarmament. This would make it more resilient to leadership transitions, because each deal would produce tangible results and probably build more support at home. And as trust is built on the successful implementation of agreements, this would actually help building trust, which means that the successful implementation of each phase will create different, better condition for the negotiation of the next, more sensitive phase, helping its success, because concessions which were not possible in the previous environment will become feasible when this changes. And this could also allow for a more strategic use of sanctions, as over time, actually, sanctions have lost effectiveness as North Korea has bred resistance and has learned how to survive without them. So they still want to have them released, but they can survive with them. And especially now that China and Russia are not really cooperating. However, and this is a bit counterintuitive, an early sanctions relief could actually boost their long-term leverage, because we would have a North Korean economy that in time would become reintegrated to the global economy. Therefore, when we get to successive phases of the process, the more sensitive one on denuclearization and the disarmament, the threat to reimpose these sanctions will have much more effect, even if China and Russia don't cooperate. And the goal would be to, in time, transform the nuclear weapons from a strategic asset into a liability for North Korea. Finally, of course, Pyongyang will also have to change its narrative, mirroring changes in Washington. However, because of the power asymmetry, Kim will need to be enabled by Trump in a way. So Trump will have to build what William Ury calls a golden bridge, a way for Kim to accept to talk about denuclearization, but presenting it as a victory, presenting it as a strategic and sovereign choice. And he will have to help him write this narrative as a victory speech and confirm it on the global stage. So according to this analysis, until this deeper disconnect in frameworks and strategic narratives between the parties is addressed, negotiation will keep stalling. However, once this is addressed, then the resolution to these historical conflicts might come much faster and easier, and maybe even less costly than either party expected. It looks impossible now, but as Nelson Mandela said, it always seems impossible until it's done. Thank you very much for listening.
So thank you so much, Marialaura. It's been interesting because I think when you were here at the East-West Center, it was a very different time politically. So it's interesting that you've been able to carry this research through to this period where we have quite possibly the potential for a resumption in those negotiations. So very timely. I am going to allow all of you to ask questions, but first I want to ask if these are your own photos because they were very distracting. Didn't you want to ask some questions about these photos? Are these your photos?
Yeah, but okay. They are quite old because the only ones that I had here were from a 2012 trip.
Okay, so I don't know how many of you noticed the Mickey Mouse, but that's always something that you notice in Pyongyang is that there's a lot more American Disney characters when you're in Pyongyang than you would think, looking at it from the outside, and a lot more interest, I think, in the United States. Okay, so I want to first I'm going to give our audience a chance to ask any questions. When you want to ask a question, please hit the button and you should get the red light that tells you that the mic is hot. And then of course, please identify yourself, just your name and your affiliation so she has some context. And then turn the mic off when you've answered a question. Do we have any questions for Marialaura in the room? If not, then we will go to, we've got a couple questions here in the virtual chat. Pardon? Do we have a question here? Oh yeah, go ahead, sorry. You just press the, yes. Oh yeah, you can press the button.
Oh, hi. Can everyone hear me? Thank you very much for your. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. My name is Yijin Sheng. I'm currently an intern at the Pacific Forum. Thank you very much for your talk. So is it possible to scroll the slides back to the part on economic sanction, like trying to improve the engagement?
This one?
I think so. So yeah, so there's a point made here, like reintegrating North Korea in global markets builds economic dependencies. But as far as I know, like current North Korea economy is almost 99% dependent on China's imports. And from my understanding, like China can always back up with its North Korea's economic needs. So I would like to know, in your analysis in this slide, what is the strategic role of China in the denuclearization of North Korea? Yeah.
You want to know the China perspective or the sanctions?
I want to know the strategic importance of China regarding on leveraging like economic sanctions on North Korea for denuclearization.
So part of the reason why North Korea has been focusing on a change of relationship with the US for a long time, even though many think that after Hanoi this has changed, is partly due to their desire to come out of the shadow of China. The relationship between China and North Korea is, as you know, very complicated. And part of why they want to change the relationship with the US is to balance that relationship. But also more, as you saw in the strategic narrative, when they see themselves as a great nations, again, like they're not talking about just US sanctions. They want the whole of UN sanctions to be released. They want to have the fourth industrial revolutions. They want to become basically what South Korea has become. They want to become much more than they're there. And this is what I based my theory on. If they can see with investments and other, you can get them to open more and to have more, going back to being the country where a lot of the made in China labels are made will not sit well with Pyongyang elites, will not sit well with the people. And so this will make the regime more vulnerable than to the imposition of sanctions. It's a difference between you have nothing to lose and you gain something to lose in a way. So China is very important and will stay very important for them. But in order to develop the way they want, they need a changed relationship with the US, I think, because it's the only country that can really do that for them. Not as an isolationist America, but as the leader of the free world. And also, I mean, the relationship with China, I mean, now we can see how they balance that with Russia on the other side. They just kind of, when you say 99%, I'm not sure that's now the reality, but in any case, that's part of the problem for them. They don't want to be so reliant on China. They don't want to become an appendix of China. It's
So thank you. I'm going to recognize that Susan Stahl online also asked to talk a little bit about the role of Russia. And I think what you're talking about is that China has quite a bit of economic leverage. It sounds like you're saying that what North Korea wants is to find a different relationship with the United States in terms of the political relationship. But how does Russia, can you expand a little bit more on the role or the impact of North Korea's deepening relationship with Russia militarily, and how that might affect what you're looking at when it comes to the deadlock in US North Korea?
North Korea, yeah. Well, I look at the deepened relations between North Korea and Russia as a reaction, kind of. On one side, we have they're seemingly having abandoned this long-term goal of changing the relationship with the US. But most importantly, we have a divide happening between Russia and the United States and between China and the United States. When the first Trump administration was engaging with North Korea, both China and Russia were actually very cooperative. This situation has changed completely. And traditionally, North Korean foreign policy is very opportunistic. It kind of, it uses the divide between great powers to its own advantage. And what I see them doing now is exactly that. They are using the divide between the US and Russia in particular to deepen the relationships with Russia, creates a sort of balance also with China, and gives them what they need at the moment. However, I don't think that Russia can substitute for what the US could do for them. Again, it can allow them to continue surviving, but that kind of vision of the great Korean nation, I think, only changed relations with the US, with all the consequences and the impact that it would have, could give them that, could open that path for him. Therefore, I still think that allowing them some kind of strategic balancing and not asking them to completely turn against Russia, as I mean their neighbors. I still think that if the US was to change their approach, there would be willingness to engage on Kim's side, because it is more convenient for them to do so. But that would have to be with the changed approach, I think now, because it's, I think they wouldn't risk to lose the relationship that they have with Russia, where they also kind of are trying to get a guarantee to have a power that would back them in case of a war on the Korean Peninsula. They would not lose that for nothing. So it would need to be a completely different setting for them.
Yes, please go ahead.
Oh, there's the red line. Mike Garcia, Emeritus Professor in Earth Sciences. It certainly would be a highly desirable goal to normalize relationships with North Korea. However, would the American public support such a thing? Because we've had so many years of hating North Korea. It's sort of built into our psyche that we need an adversary like North Korea. So other than have a show of a big deal, could Trump or anyone else actually sell this as a treaty that was ratified by the Senate?
So it is very difficult, of course, to have a treaty ratified. And this is also why, while the North Koreans were insisting on a treaty before, then in the past, I think 15 years, they have only talked about a changed relationship. However, I think that, yes, you need to change the image that North Korea has in the US. You need, as I was saying, you need to align both political bureaucratic elites and the domestic public, which is why you need, on the other side, cooperation on the part of Pyongyang, because they need to cooperate on changing that image. They need to, first of all, change their communication style. They need to work, reopen, for example, a dialogue on human rights. They need to be willing to talk about a series of issues. But these are all things that are more than possible. What we have seen already in very few months, when there was the engagement between Kim and Trump, we started to see the North Korean part changing their language, even kind of Kim coming on TV with a suit and with a very kind of Western background. So you see that if they start to talk, this is why I suggest an incremental approach. As they start to talk, and to build, sustain that dialogue, and North Korea starts to actually concede on different things, you can actually change in quite a short time the image that they have. But of course, I mean, this is not just a problem of image, it's a problem of how do you get from that, because this is what they are convinced about, right? If they change their relationship, they change their image, then they will not have to denuclearize. And in a way, you want to create the conditions for that change to happen, and them to become a partner like Vietnam, where maybe they will not be, for the moment, a democracy, but they will be a changing regime with a completely different image. But you don't want to give up on the goal of denuclearization, because then you don't want to have one more country, even if their image has changed. And that will be still challenging, I think.
So I just want to recognize that Joel Sanchez online has asked a question about whether a treaty that's worked in the past might work in this case. I just want to recognize that he asked that question. I cannot pronounce the name of the treaty that, okay, Carlos, I need your help. Treaty of Okay, there you go. So something to look at, I'll bring this up for you to look at later. And then Chelsea Alexander from the Korea Society, thank you. She says really great talk. But I think you've broached the question that she asked, but I just wanted to share that. I did want to get to this question of Mason Rabe is asking, do you realistically see Trump taking more steps in denuclearization than just dismantling the current world order and the older narratives associated with negotiations between the US and North Korea? Or would it require more escalation from the DPRK in their nuclear arsenal to bring more forward thinking like you propose? So that's a question from Mason.
So I think when you look at the approach that I propose, I don't completely see Trump ending it and actually being the one that has to face the difficult part around disarmament. I see him as being the one who will claim victory around, again, having made America safe again. The image of the North Koreans might have changed a lot. Again, I don't see a treaty happening just as yet, kind of being ratified just as yet. But I see him kind of claiming victory when actually North Korea will just not be treated as a threat anymore. Because I see kind of as him changing this relationship, changing their image, creating an agreement that can work and can change relationships. And then he will leave to other administrations the task of bringing in the next steps, which are the difficult ones, which are denuclearization and the disarmament. That would be my guess, allowing also for time.
Okay, so I'm just going to bring in a couple more questions, which is, what are the consequences, though, of recognizing North Korea as a nuclear power, which is a phrase that the president has used? What are the consequences that we need to keep in mind? Because those consequences, you're saying, will be left perhaps to later administrations, right? And then also I want to bring in the question of trust, which Sunny Kim brings up, because that is a key part of it. Your vision also assumes that there's a certain amount of trust. Where does that fit into it, and what do you see as the way to build trust so that we get to the vision that you lay out? Yeah, go ahead.
My vision actually starts from the premises that there is no trust. There is absolutely no trust. And this is why I think you need an incremental approach, because trust is built on the successful implementation. It's built on the fact that promises are kept. So what happened so far is that if we have a big deal that is negotiated in conditions where there is no trust on either side, it's difficult already to close that agreement. And then you have to have a very long process of implementation that can get lost in the way, which actually is what happened also with the 1994 agreed framework. Things happen, crises happen during the implementation process. So my proposal of starting with smaller deals, leaving aside denuclearization for the moment, is exactly in order to build trust by showing the promises can be kept. And also it means that whatever progress has been made, it's in those deals, which even if the successive round of talks stalls, is not so easily rolled back as it is now. It also means that you can sustain communication and dialogue even through deadlocks, which is what is not happening now. Now we have talks. When they hit a deadlock, then everything is rolled back and then communication ends completely. So we have to start all over again. And this brings me back to the question on denuclearization, because I think that actually Trump will be the one who has to face the consequences of recognizing North Korea as a nuclear state. because the immediate consequences, like if from one side it can open the space for diplomacy with North Korea, the other side you have the problem of how do you reassure South Korea
And Japan.
and Japan, but at the moment, South Korea is the one that is seriously talking about developing their indigenous program. If while you are doing your long-term plan, you lose the faith or you fail to respond to the concerns and to protect the interest of South Korea, they might just as well do it. And at that point, it will be impossible to also disarm North Korea, and you will just have the situation that you have with India and Pakistan. You will have two states armed, where like whenever there is a standoff, the US will have to kind of come between.
So that is a whole other discussion.
Yes.
Charles, you wanted to ask a question, make a comment?
Yeah. Charles Morrison, East West Center. I wanted to make a little comment. I think it's great to talk about narratives. I think it's a good avenue into the discussion. But there are a couple of problems with the narratives. And one is that narratives are always connected to an issue. And so in a certain way, you have to address the issue. To me, the North Korean issue is a survival of the country. And in North Korea's case, that's equated often with the regime. With the regime, the Kim regime. In the American case, you could talk about rule of law, but it's really rooted in more specific kinds of concerns about North Korea. One was that it was a breakout from the Proliferation Treaty, as you mentioned. Another is that the effect on South Korea and Japan and their possible nuclear decisions. A third, very important one was that North Korea might not handle fissile material responsibly, and it could get in the hands of terrorists. And the Syrian issue related to that. I think there are other kind of safeguard and safety questions, nuclear accidents and so forth. So all these very specific things were involved. The other problem with the narrative is that it doesn't explain why American interest in the North Korean issue goes up and down. And so during the Clinton administration and during the George W. Bush administration, it consumed a tremendous amount of time of the American decision makers who were focused on Asia. In the Obama administration and the Biden administration, they tried to avoid it. And so it wasn't a big issue. So why was it a big issue at one time? Why wasn't it a big issue at another time? In the Trump administration, he made a big issue of it. But first he made a big issue of it one way, and then he made a big issue of it another way. So right now, though, I think it's not a big issue. Americans are talking about a threat from North Korea. And it's partly because North Koreans are not testing. It's partly because we have so many other things that we're worrying about. And we're not worrying about the rule of law, as you pointed out. So I think Trump is unlikely to pick this up. I think he's much more interested in Iran because that's a new issue. It creates, he thinks he can use Putin for that. And that will give him publicity. As long as North Koreans are not testing, it's not going to be an issue. So one solution forward is not trying to negotiate a new agreement, but just let the status quo continue. And another is to think about the issues and how you address those issues. As you say, recognizing that the North Korean nuclear weapons program is not going away, but we can talk about these issues like how to protect the fissile material and so forth. But I don't think the sanctions will be lifted. They might be partially lifted, but because it is a violation of a UN treaty, because there is a UN resolution, and it's going to be difficult to take that route.
Thank you, Charles. Did you want to make a comment? Otherwise, I will get a last round of questions?
Oh, I can respond later.
Okay, okay, Rob, let's take a couple and then we'll group them all together. Okay, so the three of you can ask your questions at once.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I'm Rob York. I'm Director for Regional Affairs at Pacific Forum, and I wanted to ask you, what do you see as South Korea's role in this? And are there risks associated with North Korea bypassing South Korea to talk directly to the United States? And if it does the US have a responsibility to negotiate anything on South Korea's behalf?
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for your talk.
Can you press the microphone?
Thank you so much for your talk. My name is Lena Chang. I'm an intern at Pacific Forum. And I was just wondering that given that North Korea has survived thus far to a certain extent economically, and that its ontological security or regime survival is reliant on traumatic historical war memory and its belief of US as an imperialist power, do you truly see sustainable progress through an economic and incremental approach without addressing the core ideas of like the Korean War? Because I imagine that if they do proceed with an incremental approach, it kind of delegitimizes their own authority on the North Korean side.
Good question. Okay, one more here.
Okay. Hi, my name is Megan. I'm also an intern with the Pacific Forum. My question is regarding possible reactions from China and Russia to a warming US DPRK relationship that sits right at their border, and what the US should do in, I guess, to address these possible reactions. Thank you.
So first, South Korea regime, okay. So of course, okay, let's see the way the North Koreans have always approached this kind of US and South Korea can be seen as them sidelining the South Koreans. However, I think that it is because they actually think that the problem is with the US. So if they don't solve the issue with the US, even if inter-Korean talks are successful, it will not bring to anything, will not solve anything. Therefore, on the part of the US, if we recognize this reality, we have to make sure and to support, and maybe now with Lee having won the election, that could be a possibility, that there is a parallel inter-Korean process. But from the North Korean side, the process, the bilateral negotiations or talks with the US have to advance, have to bring something, have to bring them this guarantee that something has changed with the US for them to actually trust the program that has been done on the Korean Peninsula. So there can be for them talks with the US without South Korea. There cannot be talks with South Korea if they don't have talks with the US. Or even if they are, I think because of how they see the South Koreans as being kind of under the US, they want to talk to the boss. That was also kind of part of the problem with the six-party talks. They broke it a lot into bilateral relationships instead. So from the part of the US, they have to make sure that not only there is a parallel process between the two Koreas, but also that at a certain point in the talks, very early on in the talks with North Korea, they have to encourage the creation first of a trilateral. So there would be bilateral US DPRK, bilateral inter-Korean about peace. And then they have to encourage to have a trilateral where they discuss what security on the Korean Peninsula should look like until they talk about denuclearization. So for the, you might say for the moment, you keep your arsenal, although kind of you don't produce anymore, you don't test anymore. But on the other side, what do we do so the South Korea can feel safe? in order to block the situation in a kind of safe deterrence. That's what would be my suggestion. And your question, so it was about how the regime can, what was it about?
I guess it was more about if you truly see like
Yes,
an
them
economic,
engaging in
a
this,
realistic approach, without addressing the Korean War or anything related to Korea's ontological security.
So this, there is a reason why I talked about strategic narrative, which is a narrative that is created. We have seen in the past how whenever there was an opening with the US, all this narrative, all this adversarial view of the US could be changed in a very short time. So the only thing the regime needs at that point, and it was already happening in the engagement with the first Trump administration, they started to change the narrative around the relationship with the US. So this is actually, I mean, we have seen how this would be a challenge for Trump because this is a democracy, but it's actually much easier for an autocratic regime with complete control over the national narrative to change. So someone who was a friend becomes an enemy, someone who was an enemy becomes a friend. So that would be actually something much more possible for the Kim regime, one of the easiest parts of it, to change the narrative and to anchor it to even change the history and the way they see the history. This is something that you can quite easily do. So when the regime kind of engages, he engages always with an opportunistic kind of approach. Of course, these worldviews still influence their vision and their framework, but they are much more pragmatic in their engagement. So I see them changing that quite easily. And the third question, there was...
Yes, it was related to responses from China and Russia about a warming US DPRK relationship.
So of course, I mean, the relationship has changed. As I said, in the past, China and Russia were both quite supportive. They were cooperating. Actually, China, when it comes to denuclearization of North Korea, would still, actually, they were trying to start dialogue to cooperate on the issue. They are still interested in having a denuclearized North Korea. Now, of course, having a changed relationship between the country when it comes to economic investment, they will have red lines. So I see that's becoming, like, as long as you start and you stabilize the situation on the peninsula, I think China would be quite happy. When you go farther, then a game will start. The problem will probably be more with Russia, because I think that unless, and this would be my point with Trump now, my bet would be that if he manages to resolve things on the Russia-Ukraine and kind of solve that side, then he would engage with the DPRK. And at that point, things might be different than they look now, because at the moment, if they engaged, they would have to ask North Korea to take a particular stance on Russia that they might not even be able to take. But if he tackles that first, and then he engages with North Korea, then it would be quite different. I'm not sure that there would be cooperation, but there will not be the same obstacles that there might be if they engaged now with the current situation.
Yeah, so we were a little over, but we started a little late. So thank you all for giving us a little grace. I agree with you on the last point about that sequencing, but it remains to be seen how long the conflict in Ukraine will continue. So in the meantime, what we can be sure of is that North Korea will continue to expand its arsenal. So I think that what's amazing about the East-West Center is that we look at both of those angles. We look at the threat, which is absolutely important from a national security perspective, but we also, with this type of research, look at those opportunities for engagement that are essential to be prepared for as well when the opportunity arises. So I love this about the East-West Center, and I'm glad that you're all here to take part in this. So thank you, Marialaura. You can now take a breath. Please join us for our next talk. If you enjoyed this one, you can always go back and watch these and other talks from this series on YouTube. Our next talk is with Dr. Kira Vinca from the German Council on Foreign Relations. She'll be joining us on Friday, June 27th at 9 a.m. Honolulu time. And with that, thank you so much. Let's give her a round of applause.